The silence on the bridge of the HSS Endeavour was a fragile crystalline thing stretched taut across the void. It was the silence of held breaths, of 150 souls poised on the razor's edge of history. Admiral Kalen Vance stood before the armored transparency of the main view screen, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture a study in rigid calm. Outside, the starfield was a placid, familiar tapestry, the same one humanity had stared at for millennia. But today, a single point within it, just beyond the orbit of Neptune, was about to change forever. Every sensor on every ship in the six-vessel diplomatic fleet was focused on that one empty coordinate, waiting for a guest who had announced their arrival via a series of elegant, mathematical pulses a month prior. "Still nothing, Admiral," the tactical officer reported, his voice a low murmur in the professionally hushed environment. "All channels remain open, all sensors active. They're 20 minutes past the designated arrival time." "They're not late," a soft voice said from beside him. "They're making an entrance." Vance turned his head slightly to acknowledge Ambassador Eva Rostova. She stood at the command dais, her formal white diplomatic robes a stark contrast to the charcoal-gray utility of the bridge. Her presence was a necessary political reality, but to Vance, it felt like bringing a poet to a firing range. She saw nuance and opportunity, he saw threat vectors and weapon arcs. "Punctuality is a sign of respect, Ambassador," Vance replied, his gaze returning to the void. "Its absence is a message." "Or perhaps their conception of time is simply different from ours," she countered smoothly. "We must not begin this encounter by interpreting everything through a lens of suspicion, Kalen." Before Vance could formulate a response, the universe seemed to flinch. There was no flash, no explosion. Instead, the starfield on the viewscreen warped, pinching inward toward a single point. Space itself seemed to fold like fabric, the distant points of light swirling into a vortex of gravitational distortion. A junior officer gasped. On the main screen, reality pleated, folded, and then, as if it had been there all along, the Vex Imperium vessel resolved into existence. It was a thing of impossible grace, less a machine and more a manifestation of art. Its hull was a seamless, flowing teardrop of pearlescent material that shifted through hues of silver and bone white in the faint sunlight. No seams, no rivets, no visible engines or weapon ports. It hung there, radiating a palpable sense of ancient power and utter superiority that made the Endeavour, humanity's finest flagship, look like a crude, riveted iron boiler by comparison. "They're hailing us," the communications officer announced, her voice tight with awe and fear. "On screen," Rostova commanded, her voice steady, though Vance noted the slight tightening of her hands. The being that appeared on the main holographic display was not a face, but a sculpture of silver and light. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but housed within an intricate environmental suit that flowed and shifted like liquid mercury. There was no audio translation. The words simply bloomed inside their minds, an invasive, psychic pressure that felt cold, clinical, and layered with a weary, patronizing amusement. "We acknowledge the dominant life forms of this stellar system. Your vessel's designation, your military commander's rank and title. We have no time for the lesser ceremonies." Rostova's jaw tightened. The dismissal of her role was a calculated insult. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova of the Unified Sol Federation. I carry the full authority to speak for the human race. With me is Admiral Kalen Vance, commander of this first contact fleet." The Vex commander's light form shimmered, a visual representation of a dismissive scoff that scraped unpleasantly across their minds. "An ambassador is irrelevant, a talker. We speak to the entity with the capacity for violence, for it is the only true measure of a species' will. Admiral, your fleet's primary armaments are kinetic accelerators. You throw solid matter. How delightfully archaic. We detected the residual magnetic fields of your precharged sequences from a light hour away. They are quaint toys from a species barely out of its planetary cradle." Vance kept his eyes forward, his face a mask. "Our toys have kept the peace in our space for 2 centuries. The psychic amusement intensified, a wave of intellectual contempt that made several bridge officers physically recoil. "Peace from what? Other solids throwers? Your cradle has been empty, little ones. Now it is not. The Vex Imperium hereby claims this system and its tributary worlds under the mandate of civilizing expansion. Your technological immaturity makes you wards of the Imperium. Your resources, particularly your system's most dense metals, will be tithed as payment for our magnanimous guidance. You will power down your weapon systems and prepare for an inspection boarding. These are not terms. This is a statement of reality. Rostova stepped forward, her voice ringing with cold fury, a stark contrast to the alien's invasive whisper. You have no authority here. This is our sovereign territory. We reject your claim and your insulting mandate. We came here in peace, prepared to extend the hand of friendship. We will not offer our wrists for shackles. The Vex commander was psychically silent for a long moment. The amusement vanished, replaced by a cold, clinical boredom. The psychic equivalent of a biologist deciding a specimen was uninteresting. So be it. A lesson in humility is required before civilization can be taught. Your concepts of sovereignty and friendship are the charming fantasies of an isolated child. It is time to put away childish things. The transmission cut out. Red alert, Vance roared, the command ripping through the stunned silence. Shields to maximum, point defense active, bring main batteries to firing readiness. But the Vex didn't attack in any way they could counter. There was no volley of plasma, no swarm of missiles. From nearly invisible emitters on the hull of the Vex ship, 6 beams of emerald green energy, impossibly thin and precise, lanced out. They didn't target the bridge, or the engines, or the reactors of the human ships. They targeted the railguns. On the Endeavour's view screen, Vance watched in horror as the primary turret on the heavy cruiser HSS Leonidas was struck. The massive, 30-meter barrel didn't explode. It simply glowed cherry red for a split second before peeling open like a rotten banana, its magnetic coils slumping into molten ruin. Another beam hit the Endeavour itself, and the entire ship shuddered violently as one of its dorsal railgun batteries was surgically mutilated. A gunnery officer screamed a damage report over the comm, his voice choked with disbelief. Across the fleet, it was the same, a quiet, contemptuous act of disarmament. And then, broadcast on all frequencies, came the sound. It was a chorus of what could only be described as laughter, a layered, chiming sound full of derision and utter superiority. It echoed in their comms, a soundtrack to their emasculation. The Vex reopened a channel, showing Rostova's face next to their commander's shimmering form, forcing her to watch as her escort fleet was broken. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with helpless fury. The message was clear. Her words were meaningless. Their weapons were useless. A shuttle bay on the Vex vessel opened, and a tractor beam, shimmering and golden, locked onto the Endeavour's primary diplomatic shuttle, where Rostova's personal staff waited. The Vex commander's voice returned, laced with that mocking tone. The talker will be our guest. She will have the honor of observing our civilizing work firsthand. Do not test our generosity again. Return to your home world and prepare our tribute. Admiral Vance watched, paralyzed by strategic impotence, as the tractor beam pulled the shuttle and the ambassador away from his ship. He had come prepared for a battle, for a negotiation, for anything but this. A dismissal. His fleet, his power, his entire species had been weighed, measured, and discarded as irrelevant. The laughter of the Vex still echoed in his mind as his crippled fleet, its teeth pulled without a single human casualty, began the slow, shameful journey home. The return to Earth was a procession of ghosts. Admiral Vance had enforced strict communications silence during the 3-day journey from Neptune's orbit, a decision born of shame and cold, hard strategy. He refused to let the Vex monitor their shock and horror, refused to give them the satisfaction. The 6 ships of the diplomatic fleet, their primary railgun turrets mangled into drooping, grotesque sculptures of ruined metal, limped into high orbit over a planet holding its collective breath. The visible damage was a stark, brutal message that spread through the Sol system's comnet faster than any official report could. Humanity had met its first aliens, and it had been broken. Deep beneath the Tibetan plateau, in the sterile, soundproof chamber of HIGHCOM, the silence was of a different sort. It was heavy, suffocating, thick with failure. Holographic figures of the Unified Sol Federation's Security Council flickered around the central briefing table, their faces grim etchings of disbelief and fury. On the main display, the footage from the Endeavour's logs played. The Council watched the Vex ship resolve into being. They listened to the psychic voice, layered with its infuriating condescension. They saw the impossibly precise green lances cripple their fleet's main armaments in seconds. And then came the laughter. Vance had insisted they listen to it. He wanted them to feel the full, undiluted weight of the humiliation. The chiming, derisive sound filled the chamber, and every official, from the most seasoned general to the most jaded politician, visibly flinched. "They have established what they call a tributary garrison in orbit over Mars," Vance stated when the recording ended. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the raw anger the recording had provoked. He gestured to a tactical map of the solar system, where 5 new icons glowed a hostile red. 1 battle cruiser, the luminous Resolve, and 4 smaller patrol cutters. It is a token force. They monitor all system-wide traffic, but have made no overtly aggressive moves since taking the ambassador. He paused, letting the implications sink in. They do not believe they need anything more. They think we are so thoroughly cowed that this is sufficient to ensure our compliance. An elderly man with the severe face of a lifelong politician, Council President Thabo Mbeki, steepled his fingers, his expression bleak. And the tribute, HIGHCOM, received their formal demand an hour ago. A tithe of all refined heavy metals, Vance confirmed. They specifically demand tungsten, osmium, and uranium. The first shipment is to be delivered to their position at Mars in 1 standard month. They promise Ambassador Rostova will be returned upon its receipt. "It's an execution disguised as theft," growled General Anya Sharma, the formidable head of the planetary army, slamming a fist softly on the table. "They aren't just taking our resources, they're taking the very materials required to construct new railguns, new armor plating, new reactors. They're demanding we hand-deliver them the tools of our own disarmament. Their assessment of our technology is both depressingly accurate and, I believe, deeply flawed," Vance continued, pulling up schematics of the Vex battlecruiser, pieced together from the brief, frantic sensor readings. "Their energy defenses are absolute. Our missile technology, our plasma cannons, all of it would dissipate against their shields like rain against a windowpane. Their energy lances can gut our ships from 10,000 kilometers. In a direct, symmetric fleet engagement, we would be annihilated without inflicting a single scratch. They know this. They have measured our military strength to the last decimal point." A palpable sense of despair, cold and heavy, settled over the room. They had been X-rayed, analyzed, and dismissed. The laughter of the Vex was not just an insult, it was a conclusion based on data. "They laughed at our railguns," Vance said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it cut through the gloom more effectively than a shout. "They called them primitive, archaic." He looked up, his eyes sweeping across the council members, a flicker of something hard and dangerous glinting in their depths. "They were right. Our naval railguns are toys compared to their technology, but the principle behind them, the fundamental law of physics they represent, is not a toy." He changed the display. The image of the elegant Vex ship was replaced by something far less glamorous. It was a picture of the orbital mass driver designated Ares 1, a colossal skeletal structure of girders and magnetic coils anchored to a collection of captured asteroids in the belt. It was, in essence, the largest and most powerful railgun in the solar system, though it had never been designed as a weapon. Its purpose was mundane, industrial. To fire raw, unrefined ore, payloads the size of city buses, from the mining colonies in the belt back toward the processing plants in lunar orbit. "The Vex scanned our warships, but they didn't bother scanning our industry," Vance explained, a grim, predatory smile touching his lips for the first time. "They see these as freight accelerators, harmless infrastructure, an efficient but primitive method for moving rocks from one point to another. It would not even register as a potential threat to them because it is not a military asset. It is beneath their notice." General Sharma leaned forward, her eyes widening in dawning, horrified understanding. "Kalen, you're not serious." "They're expecting a shipment of refined metals," Vance said, his voice gaining strength, pulling the council's attention like a gravity well. "They're expecting it to be delivered by a convoy of slow, fat freighters. They believe our military is broken, our spirit crushed. They believe we are dutifully mining and refining our own surrender." He pointed a rigid finger at the image of the Ares 1. "What if the first shipment arrives a little faster than they expect?" What if the container is a 50-ton slug of unrefined nickel iron, and the delivery system accelerates it to 0.1% of the speed of light? A new kind of silence fell. It was not despair, but the electric hum of furious calculation. The sheer, brutal, simple physics of the idea was staggering. Vex shields might deflect energy, but could they deflect a mountain moving fast enough to violate causality? It wasn't a weapon of finesse. It was a hammer blow that could crack a moon. It was a weapon they couldn't even conceive of, because to them, it wasn't a weapon at all. It was just a rock. They see us as a predictable, rational actor who has been beaten, Mbeki mused, the political gears in his mind spinning furiously. They expect us to cut our losses. And we will play the part, Vance declared. We will send mining ships. We will broadcast compliance signals. We will fill the comms with chatter about logistics and refining quotas. We will give them every indication that we are beaten, that we are good, obedient little primitives. He looked around the table, his gaze a challenge. We will let them sit there in their magnificent ship, secure in their superiority, laughing at the primitives who throw rocks. And from halfway across the solar system, we will throw a rock that will rip the laugh from their throats. The month that followed was a masterclass in deception, a system-wide pantomime of surrender played out on the grandest stage humanity had ever known. To the Vex occupation fleet orbiting Mars, the flurry of activity within the Sol system was the predictable, frantic scrabbling of a conquered people rushing to meet a deadline. Their passive sensors and intelligence analysts monitored the surge in comms traffic, their sophisticated translation software parsing the mundane chatter of logistics coordinators, stressed mining foremen, and overworked orbital traffic controllers. Increased energy signatures from the asteroid belt were duly noted and filed as renewed mining operations. The launch of dozens of heavy ore haulers from Ceres, Pallas, and Vesta was logged as the diligent gathering of the tribute. The Vex commander, a being named Clithius, whose consciousness was temporarily housed within the gleaming hull of the battle cruiser Luminous Resolve, found it all deeply, satisfyingly boring. The primitives were compliant. Their response was logical. They had been shown insurmountable power and had correctly calculated that resistance was futile. He had even allowed the captive ambassador, Eva Rostova, to view the system-wide activity from her stasis field prison on his bridge. It was part of the humiliation, forcing her to watch her people labor for their new masters. She watched with a stony, silent fury that he found quaint. Her species' emotional displays were as primitive as their technology. But beneath the surface of that carefully orchestrated compliance, a different, far more furious industry was churning. The Ares, mass driver, humanity's largest industrial accelerator, became the secret, vengeful heart of the resistance. Officially, its manifest listed it as preparing for high-velocity propulsion of tribute containers to minimize transit time. In reality, a hand-picked crew of civilian engineers and covert military specialists were pushing its systems into territory far beyond their design specifications. They bypassed safety governors, reinforced the magnetic rails with experimental alloys flown in under the guise of maintenance parts, and rerouted power from 3 entire asteroid mining colonies, risking system-wide brownouts for the sake of charging its colossal capacitor banks. The station's crew, a mix of grim-faced miners and wild-eyed physicists, worked in grueling shifts, their faces lit by the eerie, pulsating blue glow of overloaded power conduits. They weren't just preparing a cannon, they were building a god's own slingshot, a monument to Newtonian rage. Simultaneously, a very different part of the plan was unfolding. A convoy of 10 of humanity's largest superhaulers, lumbering behemoths like the Goliath and the Titan's burden, was dispatched from the belt. They were slow, ugly, unarmed, and utterly civilian. Their flight plans were filed publicly, charting a ponderous, fuel-efficient trajectory toward Mars that screamed compliance. The Vex patrol cutters scanned them lazily as they rumbled into the inner system, verifying their cargo holds were gradually filling with tungsten and osmium at various smaller depots along the way. It was all perfectly, reassuringly normal. Except for the 11th ship. The Stray Dog, a rust bucket or freighter captained by a disgraced former naval officer named Jana Riley, detached from the main conv under the cover of a convenient solar flare. Her ship was old, dented, and its emissions signature was so messy it was more likely to be mistaken for a cosmic junk pile than a military vessel. Its cargo hold was empty, its engines tuned for silence, not speed. Tucked away in its sensor-baffled engineering bay, wrapped in layers of lead shielding, was HIGHCOM's only prototype quantum entanglement communicator, a device that allowed for instantaneous, untraceable conversation across the solar system. It was her direct line to Admiral Vance. Her mission was simple, and in all likelihood suicidal: get close enough to the Vex fleet to provide a final, pinpoint targeting solution for the Ares One shot. She was the forward observer, the sacrificial spotter for an artillery strike launched from 300 million kilometers away. On the bridge of the HSS Defiance, a destroyer from the original contact fleet, now secretly refitted with advanced sensor arrays and hidden in the deep shadow of the moon Phobos, Admiral Vance watched it all unfold. The main convoy was the bait, the plausible threat that kept the Vex looking in the wrong direction. The stray dog was the tip of the spear, and Ares One, now humming with a terrifying amount of barely contained energy, was the hammer. "Status from Riley," Vance asked, his voice a low rumble in the hushed, darkened command center. "The stray dog is approaching the designated observation point, Admiral," the communications officer replied, his face illuminated by the green glow of his console. "She's using the debris field of a defunct Martian satellite to mask her signature. Vex patrols are focused on the main conv, just as projected. They haven't deviated from their pattern in 6 days." Vance nodded slowly. "Ares, status." "Capacitors at 105%, sir," came the reply from the other side of the bridge. "The engineering team reports the primary magnetic containment field is starting to buckle. The whole station is groaning. They can't hold that charge for long." "They only need to hold it for a few more minutes," Vance said, his gaze fixed on the chronometer. Aboard the stray dog, Jana Riley felt her ship tremble as she nudged it into the final position. The Vex battlecruiser filled her main screen, a majestic, terrifying sight. The 4 patrol cutters swarmed around it like pilot fish guarding a shark. Her ship systems were straining, the power diverters shunting so much energy to the stealth systems that the internal lights were dimming. Her fingers, slick with sweat, danced over her targeting console. "Okay, you beautiful, arrogant bastards," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Hold still for mommy." She wasn't targeting the ship itself. No sensor could do that from this range. She was painting a precise point in empty space just in front of it, a 3-dimensional coordinate that accounted for the vessel's slow orbital drift, its rotation, the light speed delay of the shot, and even the slight gravitational pull of Mars. The data streamed from her console, through the quantum link, and across the vast, silent emptiness to the straining systems of the Ares One. "Targeting solution received and locked," came the voice of the Ares One controller, tinny and distant over the comm link to Vance's bridge. "Projectile is in the chamber. Admiral, we are ready to fire on your command." Vance took a deep breath. This was it, the culmination of a month of lies, backbreaking labor, and desperate, vengeful hope. He looked at the main convoy of haulers, still days away from Mars, broadcasting their peaceful, commercial intentions. He looked at the tiny, faded icon representing the stray dog, hiding in a cosmic junk pile. He thought of Ambassador Rostova, forced to watch her people bend the knee. He thought of the Vex's laughter, a sound now seared into the memory of every human who had heard it. "To the crew of the Ares One," Vance broadcast, his voice cold, formal, and clear, "you are firing on my authority. For the honor of the fleet, for Earth, send the tribute." On the Ares One, the final command was relayed. Deep within the heart of the groaning station, massive cryogenic clamps retracted. For a microsecond, a 50-ton cylinder of solid, unrefined nickel-iron ore floated free in the launch chamber. Then, the universe turned into a singular, forward-facing vector. An unimaginable surge of electromagnetic force, the combined output of 3 colonial power grids, slammed into the projectile. The station screamed, a chorus of tortured metal, as the projectile accelerated down the 20-kilometer barrel. It exited the muzzle at a velocity that defied all sane engineering, a speed that was a measurable fraction of light itself. It was no longer a piece of ore. It was a kinetic violation of physics, a silent, invisible needle of pure momentum, and it had begun its 25-minute journey across the solar system. The 25 minutes were the longest in Admiral Vance's life. On the bridge of the Defiance, a silent, agonizing vigil was held by every soul. Officers stood locked in place, their eyes fixed on the main chronometer as it ticked down with excruciating slowness. 300 million kilometers of empty space separated the cause from its effect, a distance that felt both impossibly vast and terrifyingly small. The only sound was the faint hum of the life support system and the whisper-soft voice of the comms officer relaying Jana Riley's updates from the stray dog, each one a single, clipped word. Nominal. Stable. Unchanged. On the bridge of the Vex battlecruiser Luminous Resolve, Commander Clithius was experiencing a state that his species' psychology approximated as serene satisfaction. The primitives were proving to be a model subject race. Their tribute convoy was proceeding along its predictable, lumbering trajectory. His intelligence officers assured him their internal communications continued to speak only of compliance and logistics. There had been a momentary, anomalous energy reading from the outer system nearly half an hour ago, but it had been dismissed as a sensor ghost from the primitive's chaotic asteroid belt, a common occurrence in a system so full of unshielded, poorly grounded electronics. He turned his attention to the human female, the ambassador, who stood rigid within her containment field. She was a living trophy of their effortless superiority, a constant reminder of how simple it had been to shatter this species' martial pride. Your people are learning their place, Talker, Clithius's thoughts projected, a cool wave of condescension washing over Eva Rostova. There is hope for you yet. Perhaps in a few millennia, you will even comprehend the science behind the shields that protect you. Eva's eyes, full of a fire he mistook for mere hatred, remained fixed on the viewscreen showing the starfield ahead. There are some things in the universe older and more powerful than your science, Commander, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Things like gravity and inertia. Clithius shimmered with amusement, the babbling of a primitive trying to sound profound. How charming. Aboard the stray dog, Jana Riley felt her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat counting down the final seconds. Her ship's systems were groaning, heat warnings flashing amber on her secondary console. The Vex battlecruiser filled her viewscreen, a monument to alien power. She had done her part. Her targeting data was locked in, a single point in space that the universe was now conspiring to fill. She was just a spectator with a front-row seat to the apocalypse. The chronometer on her console ticked to 0. For a full, agonizing second, nothing happened. The Luminous Resolve continued its majestic, silent orbit. The patrol cutters continued their lazy dance. Then Riley saw it. Not the projectile itself, it was too small and too fast to ever be seen, but a flicker. A brief, almost imperceptible warping of the stars directly behind the Vex ship. It was the faintest ripple of spacetime, the only visible herald of the slug's arrival. The impact was silent, soundless, absolute. The Vex ship's energy shield, a marvel of technology designed to dissipate terawatts of focused energy from plasma cannons and disruptor beams, flared a brilliant, impossible white for a single eye-searing nanosecond. It didn't break or shatter, it was simply irrelevant. It was a net trying to catch a tidal wave. The problem of a 50-ton slug of solid matter moving at a relativistic velocity was so far outside its design parameters that its effect was negligible. The slug struck the Luminous Resolve dead center of its mass. It did not create a crater, it did not explode, it simply passed through. A line of pure, incandescent ruin bisected the Vex ship from its dorsal spine to its ventral keel. In the silent vacuum of space, the Luminous Resolve did not erupt in a dramatic fireball. It came apart with a terrifying geometric precision. A catastrophic wave of kinetic energy, transferred in a microsecond, vaporized everything in the projectile's direct path and flash-fractured the ship's crystalline structure along its stress lines. The two perfect halves of the once graceful vessel, connected for a fleeting moment by flickering energy conduits and the ghostly plume of frozen, venting atmosphere, drifted slowly, silently apart. The ship had been split open like a seed pod, revealing the dying, flickering light of its internal systems to the void. Commander Clithius, his ambassador trophy, and his entire crew ceased to exist in the same instant, their arrogance and their physical forms annihilated by a piece of rock. On the bridge of the Defiance, a collective, strangled gasp went through the crew as the tactical display updated. The single, serene icon for the Vex battlecruiser blinked once, then split in two before fading to a stark, blood-red target destroyed. The 4 Vex patrol cutters, their command ship inexplicably vivisected before their very senses, were momentarily paralyzed with a confusion so profound it bordered on a systems crash. It was a fatal hesitation. "All ships," Vance commanded, his voice cold as the grave, the words he had been waiting to speak for a month. "Engage." Across the system, the 10 harmless ore haulers of the tribute conv answered. The mask of commerce dropped away in an instant. Massive panels, disguised as cargo bay doors and heat shields, slid open with hydraulic force. They did not reveal holds full of ore. They revealed rows upon rows of military-grade magnetic accelerators, smaller, faster-firing railguns, salvaged from decommissioned destroyers and secretly retrofitted onto the freighter's superstructures. The Vex patrol cutters, their shields oriented to face deep space where any conventional threat might originate, were completely exposed to the approaching merchant fleet. Before they could reorient, before their logical systems could even process that the primitives were not just defiant, but actively hunting them, the sky lit up. A coordinated volley of hundreds of smaller, solid tungsten slugs tore through the vacuum. The Vex cutters were built for speed and patrol, not heavy, sustained combat. Their shields, weaker than the battle cruisers, collapsed under the sheer, overwhelming volume of the kinetic swarm. The impacts were brutal, visceral. Hulls were punctured, engines crippled, reactors breached. Where the Ares one-shot had been a surgeon's scalpel of impossible force, this was the savage bludgeoning of a pack of wolves. Within 90 seconds, the one-sided battle was over. The icons for the 4 patrol cutters winked out on Vance's display, joining their commander in oblivion. Silence descended once more, thick and profound. The Vex occupation fleet was gone. A new, expanding field of wreckage and frozen gas now marked the orbit where the luminous Resolve had so arrogantly sat just moments before. On the stray dog, Jana Riley slowly let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for 25 minutes, her knuckles aching from her death grip on the console. She had survived. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Vance stared at the clean tactical map. The Vex laughter was gone, erased and replaced by the silent, damning testimony of shattered ships. He had answered their mockery with mathematics and rage. The first retaliation had been a catastrophic success, but he felt no elation, only the cold, heavy certainty of what was to come. You do not kill a squad of Imperial soldiers without the Empire taking notice. He had just kicked the hornet's nest. Now the swarm would be coming. The news of the victory at Mars struck the Sol system like a thunderclap. For a month, humanity had been held in a state of quiet, suffocating dread, force-fed a diet of shame and compliance. The destruction of the Vex tributary garrison shattered that spell. When the first sensor readings from the Defiance were confirmed by long-range observatories, a wave of disbelief gave way to an explosion of pure, unadulterated euphoria. The footage of the luminous Resolve being split in two became the single most-watched video in human history, played on every public screen from the arcologies of Earth to the domed habitats of Ganymede. The Vex's mocking laughter was replaced by the roaring cheers of 8 billion vengeful humans. Admiral Kalen Vance, Jana Riley, and the crews of the cobbled-together tribute fleet were hailed as saviors. Their return journey was a triumphal procession. They were no longer the ghosts who had limped home from Neptune. They were conquering heroes. The 10 haulers, their weapon bays now proudly displayed, were given an honor guard of every functioning military vessel left in the system. The stray dog, dents, rust, and all, was treated with the reverence of a holy relic. For a fleeting, glorious week, humanity believed it had won. They had met the galactic bully on the playground, and with a single, well-aimed rock, had knocked him flat. The celebration ended abruptly on a Tuesday. With no warning, every communication screen in the solar system was hijacked. From personal hand terminals to the giant advertisement billboards in Times Square, the feed was replaced by the image of a new Vex. This one was different from Clythius. Its form, housed in obsidian and gold armor, was larger, more ornate, and radiated a cold, ancient malice that made Clythius's arrogance seem like childish petulance. The psychic voice that followed was not layered with amusement. It was a monolith of pure, bottomless wrath. I am Executor Tethys of the Vex Imperium, 4th Fleet. The being you knew as Clythius was a low-level functionary tasked with the simple administration of a primitive race. Your actions have demonstrated that you are not merely primitive, you are vermin. A technological infestation that uses crude physics as a weapon, a blight upon the elegant order of the galaxy. You have forfeited your right to exist. The view shifted. It showed a starfield, but this one was crowded. A fleet of Vex ships, so numerous they looked like a swarm of metallic locusts, hung in the void. There were dozens of the patrol cutters they had seen before, at least 20 battle cruisers identical to the one they had destroyed, and at the center of the formation, dwarfing all the others, was a ship class they had never seen. It was a behemoth of interlocking black blades and glowing red energy lines, a vessel that looked less like a ship and more like a weaponized cathedral of hate. The 4th Fleet is a cleansing instrument. We are en route to your star system. We will not demand tribute. We will not take prisoners. We will methodically deconstruct every artifice of your civilization, from your orbital stations to the deepest burrows on your home world. We will render your planets down to their component molecules. Your species will become a footnote in the Imperial archives, a cautionary tale about the consequences of insolence. You have 50 of your planetary rotations until our arrival. Contemplate your annihilation. The transmission ended. The screens returned to normal, but the world had changed. The silence that fell across the solar system was deeper and more terrifying than any that had come before. The euphoria curdled into a collective, primal scream of terror. Panic buying, riots, and doomsday cults erupted overnight. The victory at Mars was no longer seen as a triumph. It was the act that had signed their death warrant. In the HIGHCOM chamber, the mood was funereal. The holographic image of the Vex punishment fleet was frozen on the main screen, 171 hostile icons, including the monstrous dreadnought. "Surrender," Council President Mbeki whispered, his face ashen. "We must broadcast an unconditional surrender. Beg for mercy." "Did you listen to him?" General Sharma shot back, her voice shaking with rage. "There is no mercy. They aren't coming to conquer us. They're coming to erase us." "Then we fight, a glorious last stand," another councilman yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Fight with what?" Mbeki cried, gesturing helplessly at the screen. "Look at it. Our fleets combined couldn't take on one of their battle cruisers in a fair fight, and they're bringing 20. Plus that thing, Vance's trick was brilliant, but it was a one-shot weapon. They know about our mass drivers now. They will see the next one coming 1,000,000 kilometers away." All eyes turned to Admiral Vance, who had stood in silence throughout the chaotic debate. He looked tired, the lines on his face carved deeper than they had been a week ago. "Mbeki is right," Vance said, his voice cutting through the noise. "The trick won't work again. They will be expecting a single, powerful kinetic strike. They will have their shields recalibrated. Their point defense systems will be ready. A single projectile, no matter how massive, will be intercepted or deflected." A fresh wave of despair washed over the room. "So we don't fire one," Vance continued, his voice hardening. He waved his hand and the tactical display changed. It zoomed in on the asteroid belt, the massive, chaotic band of rock and metal between Mars and Jupiter. "We fire 1,000, 10,000. He brought up images of the system's industrial backbone. Mining platforms, refinery stations, automated ore extractors, hundreds of facilities scattered throughout the belt. "They think our weakness is our reliance on crude physics and primitive industry," Vance explained, a cold fire in his eyes. "We will turn that weakness into our greatest strength. We are going to turn the entire asteroid belt into a minefield, not a field of explosive mines, but of kinetic ones. We will fit every mining station, every refinery, every deep space tug with a small, cheap, mass-produced railgun. We won't be firing 50-ton slugs. We'll be firing slugs the size of a shipping container, an automobile, a garbage can. We can't build a fleet to match theirs, so we won't. We'll build 1,000 hidden gun emplacements instead." He looked around the room, meeting their stunned gazes. "We are going to lure their fleet into the belt. They will see it as a navigational inconvenience, a primitive junkyard, and when they are deep inside, we will spring the trap. We will hit them from 360 degrees with a storm of solid matter so dense their shields and point defense systems will be overwhelmed by pure, undeniable mathematics. We will turn their cleansing instrument into scrap metal, one rock at a time. The 50 days that followed were a testament to the terrifying power of a species staring into the abyss. The initial wave of panic and social breakdown was quelled by a brutal, efficient implementation of global martial law. Under the unified command of Admiral Vance and General Sharma, every resource of the Sol system was mobilized not for a battle, but for a project of impossible industrial scale. Humanity, which had bickered and warred with itself for centuries over ideology and borders, was now united by a singular, primal purpose: survival. The asteroid belt, once the domain of grizzled miners and corporations, was transformed into the largest military construction site in history. The plan, codenamed Operation Avalanche, was a logistical nightmare that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. Now it was their only hope. Fleets of transports, stripped of all non-essential components to maximize cargo space, began a constant, system-wide shuttle service. Prefabricated railgun assemblies, mass-produced in every factory from lunar orbit to the manufacturing hives of the Terran arcologies, were shipped out by the thousands. They weren't elegant or powerful like the Ares 1. They were crude, simple, and cheap. Magnetic rails bolted onto a power source and a targeting computer designed for a single, desperate volley. Miners became soldiers. Engineers became artillerymen. Hulking, slow-moving ore processors, some of them kilometers long, were hollowed out and retrofitted. Their cavernous holds were filled not with rock, but with rows of these makeshift cannons. Smaller mining outposts, some little more than a pressurized dome on a rotating asteroid, had guns bolted directly to their nickel-iron foundations. Automated drones, normally used for prospecting, were reprogrammed to ferry ammunition, chunks of raw, dense ore, to the hidden emplacements. The human element was the most critical. Tens of thousands of civilians and reserve soldiers were deployed into the belt, learning to operate their new weapons in rushed, frantic training sessions. They lived in cramped, temporary habitats, breathing recycled air, their only view the star-dusted black and the silent, pockmarked surfaces of their new homes. They were a scattered, hidden army, waiting in ambush among the cosmic debris of their solar system. Vance knew the Vex would be watching. The core of his strategy was to make humanity's preparations seem pathetic and desperate. A select number of naval vessels were sent on high-profile patrols, engaging in pointless, showy maneuvers. Comms traffic was deliberately allowed to leak, filled with frantic, disorganized chatter that painted a picture of a military in chaos. They even staged a failed attempt to move the Ares 1, making it look like it had suffered a catastrophic power failure. It was all a grand, desperate deception, designed to reinforce the Vex's belief that they were facing a broken, disorganized enemy who was flailing blindly in the dark. The bait for the trap was Earth itself. The Fourth Fleet, Vance reasoned, was an instrument of rage. Its commander, Executor Tethys, would not be content to bombard Earth from a safe distance. He would want to get close. He would want to watch the planetary shields fail, to savor the destruction from a front-row seat. To do that, he would have to cross the asteroid belt. 49 days after the Executor's proclamation, the Vex arrived. They did not fold space into a single point as Clythius had. They tore a hole in it. A screaming, violent rip in spacetime opened near the orbit of Jupiter, and the Fourth Fleet poured through like wasps from a nest. The sensor readings flooded HIGHCOM, confirming their worst fears. 171 ships, led by the colossal, blade-winged dreadnought, the Wrath of Ages. They moved with an arrogant, unhurried confidence, a wave of inevitable destruction sweeping toward the inner system. On the bridge of the Wrath of Ages, Executor Tethys observed the primitive system with cold contempt. His sensors painted a clear picture: a few scattered naval ships making a futile stand near Jupiter's moons, and a chaotic mess of industrial debris further in. The Primitive's fleet is attempting an engagement, his tactical officer's thoughts projected. Their signatures are weak, their formations chaotic. Irrelevant, Tethys replied. Wipe them from existence. Do not deviate from our course for the primary target. The vermin must be purged at the root. A volley of emerald lances, far more numerous and powerful than those used by Clythius, shot out from the Vex vanguard. The small human fleet, a sacrificial lamb of older destroyers and cruisers, was obliterated in moments, their final, defiant volleys of railgun slugs dissipating harmlessly against the layered Vex shields. It was a pathetic display, exactly as Vance had planned. The Vex fleet continued on, unconcerned. As they approached the asteroid belt, their navigators noted the dense fields of rock and ice. To the Vex, whose technology allowed them to manipulate gravity and shrug off minor impacts, it was simply a cluttered, messy region to be passed through. Their long-range scans showed the hundreds of industrial platforms, most of them powered down and inert. They were flagged as debris, the abandoned infrastructure of a dead species. Deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid designated Rockfall Actual, General Sharma stood on a makeshift command deck, watching the Vex fleet advance on her tactical display. Her hands were slick with sweat. All across the belt, thousands of hidden gun crews were watching the same thing, their fingers hovering over firing studs. The Vex fleet plunged into the belt, their formation tightening slightly to navigate the denser regions. They were halfway through, the bulk of their fleet passed the orbit of Ceres, when Sharma drew a deep, shaky breath. She opened a channel to every hidden emplacement, her voice echoing in thousands of headsets. All stations, this is Avalanche Actual. The targets are in the kill box. Her voice hardened. Stand by to execute, on my mark. The Vex dreadnought, a monument to invincible power, glided past a seemingly dead refinery station. Mark. Across a region of space millions of kilometers wide, the junkyard came alive. From every direction, from above and below, from behind seemingly inert asteroids, and inside dormant refinery husks, a storm of raw matter erupted. It wasn't a coordinated volley aimed at specific ships. It was a simultaneous, brute force release of 10,000 kinetic projectiles. 10,000 chunks of iron, nickel, and rock, accelerated to hypersonic speeds, converged on the Vex fleet. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The Vex point defense systems, designed to intercept dozens, perhaps even 100 projectiles, were drowned in a tidal wave of threats. Their computers stuttered, trying to prioritize targets in a 360-degree onslaught. Their shields, calibrated for high-energy attacks, flared brilliantly as they were hammered by a relentless barrage of pure, dumb mass. A patrol cutter, struck by 3 slugs simultaneously from different vectors, shattered like glass. A battle cruiser's shields collapsed under a concentrated hail of rock, and its hull was punctured in a dozen places at once, causing a catastrophic reactor breach. On the bridge of the Wrath of Ages, chaos erupted. Alarms blared as a dozen ships reported critical damage simultaneously. Tethys stared at the tactical display, his psychic calm shattered by disbelief. The debris field wasn't debris, it was a nest. A primitive, disgusting, brutally effective trap. Fire on the sources, he commanded. Eradicate them. Emerald lances stabbed into the darkness, vaporizing the asteroids and platforms that had fired. But for every gun emplacement they destroyed, a dozen more unleashed another volley. The humans weren't trying to survive the battle. They were just firing. It was a battle of attrition, and they were trading worthless rocks for priceless warships. The elegant, orderly Vex fleet, caught in the heart of the storm, began to die. The Battle of the Belt, as it would later be known, was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was a grinding, mechanistic process of annihilation. There were no brilliant maneuvers, no daring dogfights, no elegant exchanges of strategic blows. It was the cold, brutal arithmetic of violence, pitting overwhelming numbers against overwhelming technology. For the Vex, it was like being caught in a cosmic machine designed for the sole purpose of tearing them apart. On the bridge of the Wrath of Ages, Executor Tethys watched his fleet disintegrate. The serene, orderly patterns of his ships had devolved into a panicked, chaotic scrum. Vessels that had never known a scratch were being hammered into scrap by a relentless, three-dimensional barrage of primitive matter. His tactical display was a sea of flashing red icons and cascading damage alerts. His subordinates' psychic projections, once cool and disciplined, were now screams of confusion and pain. Executor, the shining blade and the luminous spear are reporting shield collapse. They are venting atmosphere. Hull breach on the unwavering gaze. Multiple impacts. We've lost main power. We can't track them all. The projectiles are coming from every vector. Tethys's cold fury burned through the chaos. Recalibrate shield harmonics. Focus on kinetic absorption. All ships, forward batteries, sanitizer corridor, burn a path through this filth. Vex fleet responded with a desperate, furious fusillade. Beams of emerald energy, wider and more powerful than before, swept through the asteroid field. Entire asteroids were vaporized in an instant, the hidden human gun crews inside them ceasing to exist without a sound. General Sharma, from her command post at Rockfall Actual, watched dozens of friendly icons wink out on her own display. She felt a pang of loss for each one, but her face remained a mask of grim determination. Every crew out here knew the price. They were trading their lives for Vex hulls, and it was a trade humanity was winning. The Vex dreadnought itself was a fortress. Its multi-layered shields shimmered and buckled under the constant impacts, but they held. Hundreds of slugs, any one of which would have crippled a lesser vessel, were deflected or vaporized against its immense defenses, but the sheer number of impacts was having an effect. The shield generators were overheating. Power was being diverted from other systems. The wrath of ages was being slowly, inexorably worn down. Then came the second phase of Operation Avalanche. Harpoon teams, you are cleared to launch, Vance's voice ordered from HIGHCOM, a calm, cold presence in the chaotic comms channels. Hidden in the deeper, more chaotic regions of the belt, a special force had been waiting. They were not gun crews, they were tugboat captains and deep space welders piloting heavily modified industrial ships. These ships, retrofitted with oversized engines and grappling claws, now launched their own projectiles. They weren't solid slugs. They were massive, rocket-propelled harpoons attached to thousands of meters of high-tensile carbon nanotube cable. As the Vex battle cruisers focused their fire on the railgun emplacements, these harpoon ships darted in from their blind spots. They fired their projectiles not at the shields, but through the weakest points where shields were flickering under the kinetic storm. Harpoons the size of small fighters punched through the outer hulls of Vex ships. They weren't designed to do damage, but to get a grip. Aboard a crippled Vex battle cruiser, the crew registered the minor hull breach just as its engines suddenly screamed. The ship lurched violently, pulled off course as if seized by an invisible hand. 1,000 kilometers away, a squat, ugly human tugboat named the Mule was firing its main drive at full power, its grappling cable drawn taut. The tug was hopelessly outmatched, but it wasn't trying to win a fight. It was just pulling. On the other side of the Vex ship, another tug did the same. The Vex battle cruiser, caught between two opposing forces, its own engines fighting against the pull, was subjected to stresses its elegant frame was never designed to withstand. With a groaning shriek of tortured metal, it began to tear itself apart at the seams. Across the kill box, the same scene was repeated. Humanity was using its most basic industrial tools, tugs, cables, and grapples to literally rip the Vex fleet to pieces. The psychological effect on the Vex was devastating. Theirs was a culture of clean, elegant, energy-based warfare. This was obscene. It was a barbarian tearing apart a clock with his bare hands. Executor Tethys watched in disbelief as one of his finest cruisers was pulled apart by two grimy, insignificant industrial vessels. This was not war. This was butchery. The rage within him coalesced into a single, decisive command. All power to forward shields and primary cannons, he projected, his voice a blade of ice. We are proceeding to the primary target. Ignore the vermin. We will burn their world and salt the ashes. That will be our victory. The wrath of ages began to move, a wounded leviathan shrugging off the piranhas on its hide. It pushed forward, its immense energy beams carving a fiery path through the asteroids, ignoring the losses of the rest of its fleet. It was now a singular instrument of vengeance, aimed at the heart of the solar system, Earth. He's making a run for it, Sharma reported, her voice tight. The dreadnought is breaking through. It's not breaking through, Vance's voice replied from Earth. It's being led. He's right where we want him. Vance stood before the main display at HIGHCOM. On it was a single icon glowing with readiness. Ares 1. The massive railgun had been repaired, its power cells charged to impossible levels. This time, it wasn't loaded with a 50-ton slug of ore. Its projectile was something new, a hollowed-out tungsten cylinder filled with the one thing Vex shields had no answer for: more mass. Packed inside it were 10,000 smaller, self-guiding slugs, the smart rocks developed after the first encounter. "Ares has a firing solution," the tactical officer announced. The Wrath of Ages cleared the last vestiges of the asteroid belt, its shields flickering but holding, its path to Earth now clear. Tethys tasted victory. The primitives had thrown their junkyard at him and failed. Then his sensors screamed. A single, massive projectile was inbound, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. He was prepared for it. "Engage interception protocols," he commanded. Dozens of smaller energy beams lanced out from the dreadnought, converging on the incoming threat. But just before they impacted, the main projectile blossomed. It wasn't one target, it was 10,000. A shotgun blast of hypervelocity tungsten filled the space in front of the dreadnought. The Vex point defense system, already strained from the battle, was instantly and utterly overwhelmed. While the ship's automated defenses were trying to track 10,000 tiny targets, the main 50-ton shell, its primary payload delivered, slammed into the Wrath of Ages. It struck the forward blade-like prow, and this time, the weakened shields collapsed completely. The impact didn't split the dreadnought, it was far too large for that. But it did something far worse. It shattered the prow, crippled the primary weapon systems, and most importantly, sent a catastrophic kinetic shockwave through the entire superstructure. The Wrath of Ages, the pride of the Fourth Fleet, the instrument of galactic cleansing, went dead in the water, crippled and adrift, halfway between Mars and Earth. The rest of its fleet was in ruins behind it, being systematically dismantled by the junkyard dogs of humanity. The battle was over. The silence that followed was humanity's. The aftermath of the Battle of the Belt was a silence that stretched across the solar system, heavy with disbelief. For days, the only traffic in the space between Mars and Jupiter was the slow, cautious movement of human ships. Salvage crews, their vessels little more than the same tugs and haulers that had won the battle, picked their way through the vast, silent graveyards of Vex technology. They found shattered hulls, powerless husks, and the two drifting halves of the once mighty Wrath of Ages. Of the 171 ships of the Vex Fourth Fleet, only the crippled dreadnought remained even remotely intact. There were no survivors. Humanity had won. It had faced a galactic empire's wrath and had not only survived but triumphed through sheer, blood-minded, industrial-scale violence. The cost had been immense. Thousands of lives were lost in the hidden gun emplacements, vaporized by Vex energy beams, but set against the alternative of total annihilation, it was a price the survivors were willing to bear. The scattered army of miners, engineers, and welders returned from the belt not just as heroes, but as the architects of a new kind of warfare. Aboard the derelict Wrath of Ages, a human boarding party, clad in heavy assault armor, cautiously made their way to the bridge. They found Executor Tethys's ornate environmental suit slumped in the command throne, its internal light dead. The psychic entity it had housed was gone, its consciousness extinguished when the kinetic shockwave had shattered the ship's psychic resonance chamber. They had not only killed the monster, they had smashed its soul. The dreadnought became the ultimate prize. Its systems were dead, its power core fractured, but its data archives were partially recoverable. For months, humanity's best scientists and xenolinguists worked feverishly to decrypt the Vex records. What they found was staggering. The Vex Imperium was not a monolithic empire. It was a vast, sprawling collection of competing fleets and feudal lords, held together by a rigid adherence to technological superiority and a shared contempt for any species deemed lesser. They learned of Vex politics, Vex territories, and most importantly, Vex psychology. They learned that the Imperium only respected one thing: overwhelming, undeniable force. Weakness was an invitation to conquest. Strength was a deterrent. This knowledge shaped humanity's next move. Admiral Vance, now the de facto military leader of a unified Sol, argued against hiding or attempting to build a conventional fleet. "We can't out-Vex the Vex," he argued before the Security Council. "Trying to match their energy weapons or shields would take centuries. We must lean into what we are. We are the primitives who throw rocks, so let's build a bigger rock." And so Project Cerberus was born. It was a planetary defense system of terrifying scale and simplicity. The centerpiece was the crippled Vex dreadnought itself. Human engineers, working with the newfound knowledge from the Vex databanks, couldn't repair its complex systems, but they could cannibalize them. They stripped out its dead psychic chambers and useless energy conduits, and in their place, built a gun. They hollowed out the entire forward third of the dreadnought's massive frame and installed the single largest magnetic accelerator ever conceived, powered by the Vex ship's own gargantuan, albeit damaged, reactor. The Wrath of Ages was reborn as the UNS Deterrence, a gun with a ship built around it. It was permanently moved to a Lagrange point between Earth and the Sun, a silent guardian aimed at the darkness. Flanking it were two more components of the system. In the asteroid belt, the junkyard was formalized. Hundreds of the larger asteroids were hollowed out, their makeshift railguns replaced with permanent, automated mass drivers, all networked and controlled from HIGHCOM. The belt was no longer a mining field. It was a permanent, kinetic minefield, a no-go zone for any invading fleet. The final piece was mobile. Using salvaged Vex alloys and reactor technology, humanity built a new class of ship. They were ugly, blocky, and stripped of all non-essentials. They had no energy weapons, minimal shields, and cramped quarters. They were little more than a salvaged Vex power core, a navigator, and a single, massive spinal-mounted railgun. They were dubbed Shepard-class ships, as their sole purpose was to shepherd asteroids, accelerating them into defensive trajectories or, if necessary, toward hostile fleets. A year after the battle, a Vex scout ship, dispatched from a neighboring sector to investigate the Fourth Fleet's silence, cautiously entered the Sol system. It was met by a transmission from the UNS Deterrence. The transmission contained no words, no threats, no pleas. It was simply the complete, unedited tactical recording of the Battle of the Belt. It showed the ambush, the slaughter, and the final, ignominious disabling of the Wrath of Ages. The Vex scout lingered for a day, its sensors scanning the new reality of the system. The menacing bulk of the Deterrence, the palpable threat of the fortified asteroid belt, and the dozen new Shepard-class ships moving with grim purpose. Then it turned and fled. News of the Fourth Fleet's fate and of humanity's horrifyingly effective, primitive tactics spread through the Vex Imperium like a shockwave. The solids throwers, the vermin, had annihilated one of the Imperium's cleansing fleets. They didn't fight with honor or elegance. They fought with math and mass, turning their own industrial backbone into an unbreachable fortress. Humanity was left alone. They were not invited to galactic councils, nor were they seen as a potential partner in trade. They were regarded as a galactic hazard, an unpredictable, savage race that had weaponized the very concept of industry. Other, smaller races, long oppressed by the Vex, began to take notice. The tale of the junkyard dogs of Sol, who had defeated an imperial fleet with rocks and repurposed freighters, became a legend whispered in the darker corners of the galaxy, a new, dawning hope that technological superiority was not the only path to survival. Humanity had not become a respected member of the galactic community. It had become something far more important, an example, a terrifying, brutal, and undeniable deterrent.